Hey everybody! Today I wanted to talk about cooking tips, and basically I put together the 10 tips that I thought will instantly make you a better cook. And when I tell you them, it'll probably be kind of like, oh, okay, like, you know, it's gonna sound a little commonsensical, but I think that sometimes we all need to be reminded of, you know, certain things that are really easy changes we can make, and it just comes down to us deciding to make them. But if you have any other cooking questions, I'm actually going to be doing a regular series on answering your questions about food. So please ask them in the comments and I will respond to them. They can be about a recipe that went wrong, it can be about a technique that makes you really nervous. Whatever it is, just put it in the comments and I will get to it in my next video. But so today it's about the top 10 tips that I came up with. So the first one is read the recipe twice. I know, that sounds so, it almost borders on condescending because it's so like obvious, but you will be surprised. Like I sometimes, back in the day when I first started cooking, I would print out a recipe or have it in a cookbook and I would kind of look at it and be like, oh, okay, here are the ingredients, whatever. And then I would just start cooking. And you know, I would be doing my prep while cooking, and I would get to a part of the recipe where it said something like, put in the fridge overnight. And it's like, oh no, I wanted to eat this in 2 hours. So just reading through the recipe a couple of times, it does a few things. One, familiarizes yourself with the ingredient list. So you understand all the ingredients that are needed, and it sort of reminds you, wait, do I actually have enough garlic? Do I actually have enough flour? It really does sort of cement that in there. And then when you read the actual instructions, it forces you to sort of understand the timing of everything, the techniques that are needed, and then also the amount of pots and pans you're gonna be using as well. So just read it twice, take the time, and it'll just prepare you that much more to actually make the recipe. The next one is know how to read a recipe. And this sounds kind of silly, but this is an encouragement to get creative in the kitchen. I feel like a lot of people read a recipe and they feel like it's a contract, like, oh no, I have to do exactly what the recipe says, otherwise it will be a failure, you know, something like that. But what's funny is that most recipes, especially if it's cooking rather than baking, in cooking recipes, there's a lot of flexibility. So for instance, it's about knowing that like, okay, it says 2 tablespoons of olive oil. I don't have olive oil. I have butter though. All right, I'll use butter. You know, it's like that kind of thing. Or like, oh, I don't have any onions, but I have leeks. Maybe I'll use leeks instead. It's about understanding what ingredients you can switch out, where you can actually cut corners, because there are some places where it's appropriate to cut corners, but then there's other places where it's not really appropriate to cut corners. A good rule of thumb is that if it's there for flavor rather than structure, you can switch it out. So for instance, in a baking recipe, if it says 1 teaspoon cinnamon, that could be 1 teaspoon cardamom. That could be 0 teaspoons cinnamon. That could be a ½ teaspoon. It could be anything you want because it's a flavor. That doesn't affect the actual structure. But a cup of flour versus 2 cups of flour, yeah, that's gonna really affect things. Number 3 is mise en place, or mise en place, which is French for, I believe it means like everything in its place. But this is one of those things that in the beginning I did not want to do, but I now have to do whenever I cook. It basically means that you go through and you measure out and prepare every single ingredient for a recipe. So if you're reading a recipe and you have your ingredient list and it says 1 cup onion chopped, that means that I have chopped my onion, I have 1 cup measured out ready to go. And I do all of that before I do my first moment of the directions. I have everything laid out. There's a few reasons why this is awesome. 1, it actually makes it a lot faster to cook. 2, a lot of times you can do this ahead of time. You can measure, whenever I'm feeling super lazy, I will straight up measure everything out and then the next day cook. Because I'm just like, I can't be bothered to deal with this that same day. So that's something that you can do ahead of time. But thirdly, it also forces you to be so organized so that then if, for instance, oh no, I think I might be burning something, you don't have to be running around. You can actually stay focused on the cooking. You're not focused on getting everything organized because you've already done that. So tip 4 is get your techniques down. And this doesn't mean you have to have amazing knife skills. Full disclosure, my knife skills are not that good. They're okay. I mean, like I can chop things. I'm not afraid of the knife, but You know, you don't have to be an entirely amazing chef with the knife skills for being a home cook. However, you do want to learn how to properly dice, how to properly chop, how to julienne, how to do these basic techniques that if you understand how to do them properly, it actually makes cooking so much easier and it makes the prep process way less of a headache. So if you want to check those out, I do have all of those basic techniques already filmed as videos, so you can definitely check those out and see them. But seriously, if you know how to dice an onion properly, it sort of will change your cooking life a little bit. It makes it so much easier. So tip 5 is also a basic, but preheat your oven. And this doesn't just, I'm just not talking about your oven, but basically everything. Like when you need to cook something in a pan, make sure the pan is hot, and then you add the oil, and then you add the ingredients. When you preheat your oven, let it preheat for a while. It's not gonna be preheated unless you have some crazy, amazing oven. It's gonna take at least like 20 to 30 minutes to fully preheat. Because if you put something that needs to be baked in an oven that isn't at the right temperature, it's gonna basically mess up the baking process. So that means it's gonna bake too slow, maybe it's not gonna rise when it needs to rise, that kind of thing. If you put something in a cold pan, you won't get a really nice sear on it when you wanna get something crispy crunchy. So once again, just like a basic technique, but you wanna make sure your temperature is always on point. Also, an easy tip for an oven is if you aren't sure if your oven's like a hot oven, if it browns or if it does what, like if it's kind of spotty, take a baking sheet and cover it in pieces of white bread and then just put it in the oven at 350 on the center rack, and just check in on it in about 20 minutes. And if you look at it, you'll be able to see, oh, this is where a lot of heat is centralized. Oh, this is kind of a cold spot, because you'll be able to see it on the bread. So that's kind of a quick tip for like figuring out how to get to know your oven a little bit better. Tip 6 is a little at a time. And this basically means have patience, but you'll notice that in baking, in cooking, in just mixing anything together, a lot of times I'll do like a little bit. So for instance, if I'm baking, I'll do like a little bit of the wet ingredients, a little bit of the dry ingredients, mix it together a little bit. You know, it's just, you kind of do it by increments essentially. I do the same thing when I'm mixing together sauces or salsas or whatever. I'll do, you know, a drizzle of something while mixing it rather than just dumping the entire thing in. So the reason why this is a good idea is because you don't want to end up getting a pocket of baking soda, a pocket of salt. First off, that's a big bummer for the person biting into it and getting a mouthful of baking soda. But secondly, that means that that baking soda that's supposed to be providing lift isn't getting mixed throughout the entire dish. It's just kind of awkwardly in one pocket. So it just means that your ingredients aren't able to do the thing they're supposed to do. So mix a little at a time and very thoroughly. Tip 7 is no half measures. If it says to caramelize the onions, caramelize the onions. A sauteed onion is not a caramelized onion. It's, you know, one of those basic things of where certain things just take time and there's not really any way around that. So just be okay with that. Lean into it. That's just how long it takes. Like roasting garlic is another good example. Waiting for bread to rise. If you try to kind of speed these things up, you're just gonna get a lesser ingredient or you're gonna get a lesser product. It's not gonna taste as good as it possibly could. So just have patience, let it do its thing, let it turn out how it's supposed to. Tip 8 is know how to measure. And this is an interesting one. So basically you'll notice that whenever you buy measuring cups, there's the measuring cups and then there's also the liquid measuring kind of pourer guys. And the reason why is because liquids actually measure out differently than dry ingredients. So dry ingredients, the measure is actually kind of more of an approximation because it's measuring density when it really should be measuring weight. If you want to actually get accurate ingredients, you'll notice a lot of professional baking recipes are actually written out by the gram, because that way you're never going to over/under measure things. You'll actually have it perfect every single time. Tip 9 is temperature. Temperature is extremely important, and I'm kind of using that as a catch-all for, I guess, like cooking temperature, but also sort of the resulting texture that you get from cooking. So if you're braising something, that means it needs to be low and slow. So you don't want to speed it up and add 50 degrees on the oven or turn it up from low to medium low so it cooks a little faster. There's actually a utility in the low temperature. The low temperature is causing things that are tough to break down and become melt in your mouth amazing. If you try to speed it up, it ends up kind of holding back and being tough and doesn't have the same moisture. So that's an example of where a low temperature is a good idea. However, on the other end of the spectrum, if you want to roast vegetables and you want them to be crispy and brown and maybe even a little burnt in a really good way, you want to basically do those at a higher temperature. So instead of doing it at 350 and waiting for a million years and it never getting brown enough, that's something where if you want to do it closer to 450 or 425, that would be a good idea for that. Same where if you want something to be seared and really crunchy, use a high temperature to get that texture. The last tip is tip 10, and it is to give yourself time. I feel like my number one thing that I do when I mess up a recipe is I assume it's gonna take way less time than it does, and then I cut corners and I try to speed things up, and then it just ends up not tasting as good as it could be, and I'm a little bit disappointed. So whenever you sit down to make something, like kind of calculate it in your head, like, okay, it says do this for 5 minutes, this for that, okay, adding it up, and then add 25% more time. Just assume it's gonna take a while. And I mean, that's annoying because you want food to happen quickly, you wanna have it now, but honestly, that's what salad is for, that's what pasta is for, that is what takeout is for, and there is no shame in that game whatsoever. Well, anyway, I hope you enjoyed learning my 10 tips for becoming a better cook instantly. And if you have any other questions, tips about cooking, about techniques, about specific recipes, please post them in the comments below. I cannot wait to hear about them. All right, well, bye guys, talk to you later.